All right. So let's hop in. So we looked at the beginning of Samuel 12 last time. And just as a way of refresher, this is what we looked at. It was a one-slide overview here. At the beginning of the chapter, the people confirmed that Samuel had not cheated or oppressed them or stolen anything from anyone. And then in the next few verses there, Samuel reminds the people that God both protected their forefathers when they remembered him and placed them under his bondage, under the bondage of their enemies when they forgot him. And now, whoops, we're going the wrong way. Okay, now we're going to get into this address that Samuel is going to give to the people here. Okay. And at the beginning, Samuel once again chastises the people for wanting a king. This has come up repeatedly. Samuel really will not let this go. And it's probably because he has not seen the repentance he wants to see, which he's going to finally see in this chapter. Samuel tells them if they fear, serve, and obey God and do not rebel against his commandments, then both they and their earthly king will continue to follow God. Verse 14, if you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and do not rebel against the commandments of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. I thought this was sort of strangely worded myself, so I wanted to ask you guys, does this mean that the people can guarantee that Saul will follow God if the people follow him? And I ask that because of the underlined portion. He says, then, this is the result, according to Samuel, this is the result of the people obeying God. The result will be both you and the king who reigns over you will continue to follow the Lord your God. Do the people have it in their power by their own obedience to make the king obey?
Well, this could be a foreshadowing of later, where we know that Saul is going to be heavily influenced by what the people want and what they're doing. So he's going to offer a sacrifice later because of the people.
Yeah. So we will see later, if you couldn't hear, as David is saying, the people will have an influence over Saul, and at times it will be a negative influence. Maybe we think of the king as always getting his way, but the king is sometimes has to give in to the people, and sometimes may when he shouldn't, as Saul will do later. Other thoughts? Because this sounds kind of like an absolute statement to me, like kind of if you do good, then this guy will do good too. I don't really think that's what it can mean. Does anyone disagree with that? Does anyone think that by one person's obedience, it can force another person to do right? I don't think that's the case. I don't see anyone disagreeing with me. I don't think that's the case just based on everything else we know about the Bible. But as David points out, we do have an influence. Do godly people have some influence over others to also be godly? See a nod? Yeah. Anyone else? Maybe not much. Yeah, sometimes not as much as we would like, but some. And certainly, David gives the negative example where the people influence him to do something wrong, but that's still an example of the power we have to encourage someone to do right? Because if you have the power to encourage someone to do wrong, but instead you don't, right? If you don't tempt those around you to do wrong, then you're contributing, then you're helping them to do what's right. And the positive example, what are positive examples? Can we, in some ways, influence other people to do good? I see another nod. How? How do we do that? Wow, this is tough. What's that? By our example. I think that's one of the strongest ones, right? If you are a positive example, if you're a godly example, do people around you see that? And can they be encouraged by that? Absolutely. And it can work both ways, right? By being a negative example, we can bring others down. So by not doing wrong, we can fail to discourage others, and by doing right, we can even encourage them to do right as well. Are there other ways? Ben?
I just think of the verse, let your light shine among men, so that your good works will go right from
Yeah. Let your light shine. Let your light shine. And so that's not just, sometimes if you get to this, we have to obey. So, we see something like let your light shine. Well, why do we let our light shine? Well, because God told us to. But there's a fundamental reason. We let our light shine, not just because God told us to, but to be an influence, a positive influence on others around us. So when I saw this verse here where it says that that if the people did right, the king would as well. And even though I couldn't take that in an absolute sense, because I couldn't believe that one man had control over another man's behavior, I do realize that there are ways in which we can have a positive influence on others. And Samuel is asking the people to have a positive influence on their king, which they will not always do. Any other thoughts or comments? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I kind of see this verse differently.
Okay, go ahead.
I see as, he said, they've made this mistake, they've asked for a king. The king's part of the mistake. So he's addressing them and the king together and not separately here. And so if you the king and you the people, will listen to the Lord, it's going to go well for them.
Okay, so the way you're looking at it is when he says, serve and obey him, he's not saying you people serve and obey him. He's saying you people and you king, you all serve and obey him. So this verse at the end comes together because he's collectively. And I think that has to be true. Even if that's not what he's saying here, which he may be, but that's clearly his message, right? Saul's message is not just to the people. Saul wants the king to be obedient as well, absolutely. Other thoughts or comments? Oh, Ben.
I think to Ben's point, that sort of like almost symbiotic reciprocal relationship is played out in the entire existence of Israel.
Yeah.
It's all the way back to the first time they entered the promised land. The people were good until Joshua died. Then they were evil and forgot the ways. Then you get another leader who's good, the people turn good, and vice versa. You flip flop all the way through the kings. It continually has that seesaw effect. The leadership of the people are closely tied to how and when and where they serve the Lord.
Yeah, amen. And I could hear you all the way over here, so I think everyone could hear that. That's a wonderful comment. And it does. And even today, we continue to see that, right? There's a symbiotic relationship. Us in the kingdom of God, we're not a bunch of individuals. We are a group of people, and we have an influence over each other. It can be for good or it can be for evil. Okay, continuing Saul's address, if the people rebel and disobey God, God will be against them. He tells them that in verse 15. Samuel chastises the people yet again, and he calls for thunder and rain so the people will know that they are wicked. After the rain, the people ask Samuel to pray that they do not die, and they confess the sin of asking for a king. And I think that they finally confess that they were wrong in this. I think this is why Samuel finally, maybe that we're late in Samuel's life and he just doesn't have a lot of opportunities to complain about it anymore. But up to this point, Samuel has repeatedly brought this point up, that they should not have asked for a king. And here finally, they confess that sin, and they ask Samuel to pray for them that they didn't die. And Samuel tells the people not to fear, and that if they serve God and do not turn after other things, God will not forsake them. But if the people continue to do wicked, both they and their king will be swept away. Verse 25. Okay. So if the people are wicked, they'll be swept away. I have a question. If God will be with the Israelites if they are faithful to him, but allow their enemies to carry them away if they are not, does that mean that we are assured of earthly punishment when we reject God and earthly reward when we serve him? You're going to raise your hand? Oh, go ahead. Okay, so if you couldn't hear, you're bringing up that we definitely will get a reward for serving him, right? And there definitely is punishment for those who don't, right? There is a heavenly reward for those who serve him, and there is a eternal torment for those who do not. So that could be the modern application, right? But I think it's interesting that in this case, he's not promising them a future benefit or a punishment after death. He's promising the results right now. So I'm wondering, does that apply to us in any way? Was there a comment here, a question?
I was just going to say, if that was true, then the apostles, some of they were constantly beat and imprisoned and chased and tormented. So they had
Yeah. So when you come to the people who were following here, first and foremost, we're following Jesus. We're following his apostles. And the point is being made that they saw some serious punishment and serious suffering. Who suffered more than Christ? So does that mean that they were bad people being punished by God? So clearly, we don't live like this, right? We can't expect, if we're godly, we can't expect our earthly enemies to fall before us, right? What we can expect is we can expect what Christ got, right? That's really what the Bible says. It says if you live like Christ, you're going to get the same kind of treatment he did. So why did that change? Why are we not, if the Old Testament is for our learning, why when we read passages like this are we not supposed to gather from that, hey, if you live right, you'll have money, and if you live wrong, you won't. It's a different type of kingdom, okay? So, yeah, we live in the kingdom we live in now, even though we're in a spiritual world, we already live in a spiritual kingdom, right? And so ultimately the rewards and punishments are going to be spiritual in nature. I like that. Other thoughts or comments?
We don't see God like immediately whenever somebody sins, like drop punishment on the nation.
Yeah.
It usually takes a whole generation.
Right. Yeah.
And it's hard for us to say we don't receive that punishment because he's
Yeah.
maybe this generation gets punished.
Oh, so you're saying, yes, sometimes the punishments we see in the Old Testament for misbehavior are generational. You don't see them right away. So maybe today, maybe wicked behavior could lead to God's wrath. Is that? But yeah. And I think even in the Old Testament we see examples, right, of people living right and suffering. We see people doing wrong and benefiting. As you said, God sends the rain on the just and the unjust. What do you think? Does God raise up nations now to punish? Does God punish the nations today?
We'd be kind of foolish if he did.
So he does? Yeah. So does that tie into this? I mean, does our behavior reflect, even though we don't expect prosperity as individuals, can our behavior as Americans affect how God treats America? Is that what you're suggesting? So maybe there is some application to this today from a national sense, is that? Go ahead, David.
One of the differences too is just it was a very national covenant.
Yeah.
And today it's not as much of a national covenant as it is a universal, open to anybody kind of covenant. And so the promises are, as a nation, if you serve me, you will be blessed. But kind of like we talked about, it's a different type of covenant.
So I think there's still, a lot of things. You could probably do a whole lesson on this. I think there's still a lot of thoughts, but very good thoughts. I'm going to move on unless there's additional questions or comments. I do think that, when I see the prosperity gospel preachers, I always roll my eyes at them, but when I see verses like this, I'm like, okay, I can see where they're getting this, right? You kind of have to stop and think about it. Why does this not mean what they think it means? And I think we've seen that it doesn't. And particularly, I really like the example of Christ and the apostles, and there are other examples we can look at of why we're not expecting these kind of earthly rewards. But I can see where they get these things. Okay, yeah, Ben.
Not to go back to your prosperity.
Oh, that's okay.
The nationalism of all. But even when we get into like prosperity gospel like that, think about the pitfall of that mentality. We're saying because, using your words, prosperity, you're meaning monetary prosperity. So the idea that because you're wealthier, you are more right with God.
Yeah.
How backwards is that from what Scripture says?
Yeah, or not,
That's the mentality. It's so easy to see.
right,
Well,
or more broadly, right, more broadly, earthly prosperity. And wealth is a big part of that. It's health. I mean, people call that the health and wealth gospel, right? Because you don't get sick and you have lots of money, right? And
I don't see many people showing their medical charts and say I'm a part of prosperity.
yeah, exactly. Okay. All right, so if we're going to jump into 1 Samuel 13 now, and the battle with the Philistines. Again, I'm not going to read this. Hopefully you read it before today. But I'm going to summarize some of the things. But the first thing I want to look at is just the timing here is really weird. This is just one of those technical details that I feel like we want to look at. Because if you read this in different translations, you're going to read something completely different, depending on which one you pick up. And it can be confusing. So the timing of Saul's reign is unclear. So in the New King James Version, which I've been using in here, it says Saul reigned 1 year. And when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people were sent away, every man to his tent. Okay, now, if you look at Young's literal translation, it says, a son of a year is Saul in his reigning. Yea, 2 years he hath reigned over Israel. But if you look at the New Oxford Annotated Bible, 3rd edition, and you look at its notes, it describes the literal meaning as this. Saul was a year old when he began to reign and reigned 2 years. So there's two opinions about what the literal meaning is. Both of them, though, have it being 1 year followed by 2 years. So Young's literal translation interprets that as a son of a year, which is kind of vague, which could mean he was 1 year old, but maybe it's worded in a little bit more vague. And then he reigned 2 years. The New Oxford Annotated Bible just flat out says that means he was a year old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 2 years. Okay. The ESV and RSV footnotes describe the literal meaning as Saul was blank years old when he reigned blank and 2 years over Israel, with the blank representing lost numbers. So they think the reason that there's no number in front of the first one, where we see the 1, is because the number's lost. And they think the 2 is part of a lost number, like it was like 42, but only 2 is in there. And the Septuagint generally omits verse 1 entirely and starts with verse 2. It calls verse 2 verse 1. The NIV says Saul was 30 based on a small number of late Septuagint texts and gives the length of Saul's reign as 40 based on the inspired commentary of Acts 13:21. So if you look at your NIV and it says he reigned 40 years, they've just copied off Luke in Acts, because it doesn't actually say 40 in the text. Some people put it at 42 years. You get 42 years by saying the 40 in Acts is a rounded off number. There's a 2 in the Hebrew text, so there was probably a missing 40. It was 42, and then in Acts it's rounded off to 40. So the 42 is a complete construction. And the Syriac translation has Saul's reign beginning when he was 21 years old. So it's all over the place. Okay, in any event, Saul was described as a young man in chapter 9, in verse 2, but by this time he has a son old enough to lead his troops in battle. So I believe some time has passed, but I can't tell you for sure what verse 1 is trying to say here at the beginning of chapter 13. Thoughts, comments, does everyone understand? I mean, it's a long way to say the text is corrupted and we're not really sure what it means. But again, I want to make a point here that Saul is now old enough to have a son that leads troops in battle. And that son is Jonathan. Saul's son, Jonathan, is abruptly inserted to the narrative in 13:2 as if the reader should know who he is. But he isn't described as Saul's son until verse 16. And we don't get a formal introduction to Saul's family until the end of the chapter 14, which I've put that up here just so we can see who these people are. The sons of Saul were Jonathan, I wrote this one down, Yishwe and Malchishua. And the names of his 2 daughters were these: the name of the firstborn Merab and the name of the younger Michael. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz, and the name of the commander of his army was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. This guy, I put the star after Yishwe, because when you get to Chronicles, it mentions, he has the name Abinadab. Okay. So Saul has an army of 3,000 men. Saul and Jonathan lead attacks on the Philistines. Saul with 2,000 of these men, and Jonathan leads 1,000. But the Philistines responded by assembling an army with 30,000 chariots maybe, and 6,000 horsemen, as many people as the sand, and as many people as the sand which is on the seashore, in verse 5. 30,000 seems a little high for chariots, particularly when you've got 6,000 horsemen. The Septuagint and the Syriac translations both say 3,000 chariots. Even 3,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen would dwarf Saul's army, which is only 3,000 men. And we don't even know how many foot soldiers the Philistines have, because he just says as many as the sand which is in the seashore. So a lot. So the Israelites hid in caves or fled across the Jordan River there in verses 6 or 7. Okay. That's going to bring us to Saul's unlawful sacrifice. Any thoughts or questions before we move into this? Yeah, again, we don't know how old he is, but he may have been on the young side. And that kind of, we're going to, not to spoil this, where we're heading with this, but Jonathan's going to have a victory here in a little bit. Who's going to give him that victory? God, right? And it reminds me of David, when David slays Goliath. Sometimes, when can a young person or an army which isn't big enough win over a large army made up of big, strong men, right? When it's God, right? So he doesn't necessarily have to be real old if God is with him, but he's probably not a little kid. He's got to have some age to him if he's going to go out there and lead troops. Okay. So Saul waited 7 days for Samuel in Gilgal, which is where he had been made king. And this is because Samuel had told him. Samuel had told him to wait there for 7 days. When Samuel did not arrive, Saul offered the burnt offering himself. And as Saul offered the sacrifice, as soon as he does it, Samuel shows up. Saul explains his actions like this: the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal. And we just saw how much greater they are than him, right? And I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore, I felt compelled to offer a burnt offering. So Saul does not want to face the Philistines, again, who are much larger militarily than him. He knows he cannot defeat them without God. He does not want to face them without making an offering to the Lord. It sounds like he's putting God first. But Samuel replies, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord will have established your kingdom over Israel. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man of his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Okay. Samuel has said to Saul, "The Lord will have established your kingdom over Israel forever." How could Saul's kingdom have lasted forever? Yeah, David's kingdom lasted forever. So Saul's not going to live forever, just like David didn't live forever. So for Saul's kingdom to last forever, it would mean that Saul's descendants would stay on the throne forever, which is what happened to David, right? Because it comes right down to finally Jesus, the descendant of David, who reigns forever. This had been offered to Saul, or this was what God had said would have happened to Saul if he had obeyed him. If Saul had obeyed God, then even though Saul doesn't live forever, his children are going to be on the throne for forever. And when I read this, it made me realize something which seemed strange to me before, was how God seems to be so quick to get rid of Saul. But when we get to the divided kingdom, we noted before how most of the kings on both sides, whether Israel or Judah, most of the kings are bad. And yet, most of the time, they get to continue to reign to the end of their lives and die and leave the kingdom to their son. And yet Saul, one little mistake, and God says, "No, I'm taking the kingdom away from you. Your son's not going to get it. Your descendants are not going to have it. I'm going to give it to somebody else." And I was wondering, why is it that God showed so much more patience with the bad kings in the future? Well, it's because of what he gave to David, right? God can't end the lineage of David permanently, because then the kingdom of David would not have lasted forever. God gave David a kingdom, or will give David a kingdom to last forever. So even when his descendants are wicked, God finds a way to let the kingdom continue. That had been offered to Saul. So did Saul give up the opportunity to be the father of the Messiah? Instead of David, could we be talking about the kingdom of Saul today? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So if Saul had had this obedience, his kingdom apparently would have lasted forever the same way David's did. Now, maybe God, in his foreknowledge, knew this wasn't going to happen. I don't know. But the reason it doesn't happen is because of Saul's disobedience. So Missed an opportunity there. So what exactly is the big deal here? Didn't God want a sacrifice? Wasn't Saul showing his reliance on God by making a sacrifice instead of going into battle with no thought of God? Eddie.
This is what we saw back in chapter 9, where he was looking for the lost donkeys, and someone, I think it was this young woman coming out of the village, told him, said, the seer is in the village, he's coming today, and we are waiting for him to offer the sacrifice. Nobody will eat, nobody will do anything until he arrives to offer the sacrifice. So Saul's already been told, you have to wait for the priest to offer the sacrifice. And yet he doesn't have that patience when he's king.
Yeah. And he's seen that example, right? Earlier we talked about one of the ways people influence others is by example. The people in chapter 9 showed the young Saul, before he was king, the example by literally saying, if you couldn't hear it, Eddie, he said, when they're waiting for, the people that Saul meets there are waiting for Samuel to come and offer a sacrifice, they won't eat until he gets there. You know, and they don't say, well, he's running late, or we're you know, they wait. And yet, we do not see that kind of patience in Saul. So even though his reasoning sounds good, he's not really showing patience. He's not really showing obedience. Yeah, David.
On that too, I think the first thing he says in verse 11 is telling. He says, well, I saw the people were scattered from me.
Yeah.
Oh, and I need to make a sacrifice
Yeah,
to God
yeah.
for that.
Yeah, but I mean, he's right about needing to make a sacrifice for the battle. I mean, that's what Samuel's coming for. And, I mean, he's not a disobedient person in the sense that he doesn't care about God and doesn't want God on his side. He realizes the necessity of having God. We've seen this before. And we've seen other examples of the people trying to kind of force God on their side, maybe without obedience. We saw it when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into a battle and got beat anyway, because even though the Lord dwells between the cherubims, just bringing the Ark of the Covenant out into the battlefield didn't give them victory. It was only later, after they repented and obeyed God and got rid of their idols, that he gave them victory. So it's obedience that God wants, right? Not us trying to force him into the situation on our own terms. And yet Saul doesn't always see it. Eddie, I'll come to you in just a second. Go ahead and get Ben.
Some of the irony of this is that this is all taking place in Gilgal. So number one, that's the first place they entered when they entered the promised land. But number two, that's where Joshua gathered all of them together. They circumcised themselves. They reconsecrated themselves to the Lord and made their sign of loyalty.
Yeah.
And now here you're seeing the exact reversal of that at the same place.
So I did not realize that this was the place where they had circumcised in Joshua. Good point. And Eddie.
And you talked about obedience, and it certainly is obedience, but it's more than obedience. We have that song, Trust and Obey. Obedience is not just simply doing the right thing, but it's doing the right thing for the right reason. And this shows the lack of trust that Saul would not wait for Samuel to arrive, because he saw the people abandoning his obedience. He saw the desertions. He was worried that we're not going to be able to win. Even if Samuel does come down, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
So he didn't trust God's timing. A great example of that is Sarah. God made a promise to Abraham, I'm going to give you a descendant, you're going to be the father of many nations. 14 years later, that hasn't happened. Sarah says, here, take my concubine. Let's help this timeline a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point. There's as Eddie's saying, it's not just lack of obedience, it's a lack of trust. You know, it's as if Saul is thinking, I've got to have God on my side, and if I don't hurry up, it's going to be too late. Is it ever going to be too late for God to defeat the Philistines? Especially when God's the one setting the timetable here. And Samuel's not even that late. I mean, he could have done, he actually shows up, apparently he seems to show up on the day he said he would. Just maybe a little later in the day than Saul was comfortable with. So are there things that seem good to us today, but which we should not do? I mean, Saul feels like he's doing a good thing. He's offering a sacrifice to God. Bless you. Eddie.
There's a passage in the book of James that says, I can't remember exactly, it's James 2:26.
Sure.
But whatever is of not of faith is sin.
Yeah. Yeah. So if it seems good to us, if it seems godly to us, we're putting God in the center, but we're serving him in a way that's contrary to what he has commanded, then it's not really a good thing. And people can make justifications today, just like Saul did. I think a lot of people read this and they kind of read through Saul's reasoning, and because we know he's the bad guy, we don't really listen to it. But if you stop and just read it, it sounds reasonable. I had to kind of stop and think, why is it not? Ben.
I was talking to somebody about this the other day. A couple weeks ago, we made the point about the Moabites and the Ammonites. Those two people were the products of people thinking they were doing something good, aka top in the world.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, it was Lot's daughters
Yeah.
having relations with
Yeah.
them. And those two people who are the enemies of God came from people thinking they were quote doing the good thing.
Yeah. Trying to justify if you don't overthink it, they kind of overthought. If you don't overthink it, it's obviously an abominable thing to do, and yet in their minds they convinced themselves that it was somehow necessary, which is similar, with Sarah thinking it's necessary for her to fix this problem that God apparently had created, but making a promise it seemed to her he couldn't keep. Okay. All right, so the Philistines moving on to the next section so we can get a little bit further in here. The Philistines had a monopoly on blacksmiths, so the Israelites had to go to the Philistines to get their plowshares, mattock, axe, and sickle sharpened. The Philistines charged a pim for this. I had a lot of trouble finding exactly how much this was. It's about 2/3 of a shekel, so it seems like you would have to work a few days, maybe two or 3 days, to earn a pim. So not a trivial amount of money. As a result, on the day of the battle, only Saul and Jonathan had a sword and a spear. And I put in this question here, why is it illegal for Americans to sell weapons, oil drilling equipment, and financial services to Iran, which it has been since I was a kid, and why is the Strait of Hormuz closed right now? In the interest of time, I'll just kind of throw out what I was thinking of here, is that we see this even today, right? This shouldn't seem strange to us, that when countries are have hostility, they try to cut off each other's resources, and it was no different in ancient Israel. Okay. So let's jump into Samuel 14 here. Jonathan defeats the Philistines. Okay. And again, this was a chapter I'd asked you to read, so I'll just jump in and sort of summarize some of the key points here. We're introduced to a descendant of the prophet Eli, Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli. Ahijah is not mentioned again by this name, but he is probably the same person as Ahimelech, who will show up later, and he was also described as the son of Ahitub. Ahijah means son of Yahweh, and Ahimelech means son of the king. So it's the kind of name where you would sometimes kind of substitute one for the other. Later in the book of Kings, there is a Levite called Ahijah the Shilonite, but this is probably too much time has passed. It's probably over 100 years in the future, so they couldn't be the same person. Saul tells Ahijah to bring the Ark of God in verse 18. And I wanted to note, I've been using this class to note some differences with the Septuagint. The Septuagint is different here. The New King James Version says, and Saul said to Ahijah, bring the Ark of God, for at that time the Ark of God was with the children of Israel. But the New King James Septuagint says, and Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ephod here, for on that day the ephod was raised up in the presence of Israel. And Ahijah's ephod had been mentioned back in verse 3, even in the Hebrew text. So the ephod's not coming out of nowhere here. I don't know why the Greek translation is different there. The Hebrew text, though, makes it sound like the book is being written at a time when the Israelites did not have the ark. Because it has for at that time the ark of God was with the children of Israel. So I'm not really sure why it's worded that way. I think the book was probably written when the Ark of the Covenant was in their possession, but it's the way it's worded there. So anyway, just wanted to note who this person was, and to show, Eli, even though Eli and his sons were killed earlier, we saw that, we noted in that he did have children who survived, and some of them are still around in the narrative. Okay. All right, so then we get into Jonathan's attack on the Philistines. Jonathan attacks the Philistines without Saul's knowledge. Jonathan shows faith in God. Verse 6, then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. So the armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Go then, here I am with you, according to your heart. Then Jonathan said, very well, let us cross over to these men and we will show ourselves to them. And if they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say to us, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hands, and this will be a sign to us. And then he reiterates that in verse 12. Jonathan and his armor bearer slaughtered about 20 men in verse 14, which is pretty good for two guys. And the Philistines trembled greatly, and the earth trembled, either literally or seemed to tremble because of the people trembling so greatly. Either suggests divine intervention. So these people aren't just afraid because 20 of their companions have been killed. They are trembling because they feel the power of God coming over them. They know they're in trouble. Okay, and then Saul realizes that Jonathan and his armor bearer are missing in verse 17. Saul commands that the ark of God be brought, or an ephod in the Septuagint. Saul hears the Philistines' distress and attacks with his men. Hebrews who had been with the Philistines joined the Israelites. With the Philistines could mean willful defectors, or it could be people who have been enslaved by the Philistines. Many commentators that I looked at see the use of the word Hebrew instead of Israelites here as significant, and they try to figure out why the sudden use of the term Hebrew. But the term Hebrew has been used many times in the book of Samuel already without any obvious connotation. So some people want to say they're called Hebrews because they were kind of looked down upon for living among the Philistines. Personally, I don't see if you can really glean anything from that. It's just Hebrews living among the Philistines. They're rising up against the Philistines, and even the Israelites hiding in the mountains joined the battle in verse 22. So the Lord saved that day, and the battle shifted to Beth-aven. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and that's verse 23. Okay, so question, why does God get credit for the victory and not Jonathan? David.
Yeah, the reason why Jonathan even was willing to go up is he said the Lord will do this.
Yeah, Jonathan was only willing to go because he believed that God might give them a victory. Because he knew that God could do by a few. So could Jonathan and his armor bearer have defeated 20 Philistines all by themselves? I don't think so, right? This isn't a kung fu movie. This is real life. Two men do not take out 20 guys. Seasoned battle. But God does. Okay, so the victory came about because Jonathan's faith in God. God gave Jonathan the victory, but only after Jonathan chose to trust in God's power and attack the Philistines. The people will claim that Jonathan has worked with God in verse 45. The people are not prophets, but are they right about this? Does Jonathan have a role in this? Is Jonathan playing a part in this victory, or is it just God? The people say it's God working with Jonathan. Is it God working with Jonathan or just God? Yeah, John. And would this have happened this way? I know the Philistines would have ultimately been defeated if it's the will of God. But would this have happened this way if Jonathan had said to his armor bearer, we better stay over here? God defeats the Philistines here, but he does so in response to Jonathan's faith. So I think Jonathan does have a role here, unless someone wants to disagree. And so what about us today, right? Do we have a role to play in God's kingdom? Yes, not yes, right? But even though we have a role to play, who ultimately gives the increase? Who ultimately decides the fate of God's kingdom? Is it us? No, it's God, but we still have a role to play. And I think we see that here. It's God who is responsible for this victory. Jonathan still had a role to play. God's going to do everything today. Nothing's going to happen if it's not the will of God for it to happen. But we still have a role to play like Jonathan. Okay, so Saul makes a vow. How are we doing on time? Oh, getting close. So quickly. Saul made an oath. Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening before I have taken vengeance on my enemies. Now, Jonathan had not heard this oath, so he eats honey that he found. Then one of the people tells him what his father had said, and rather than appeal to his own ignorance, because if it had been me, I'd have just said, I didn't know that. But rather, Jonathan challenges his father's decision. But Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. Look now, how my countenance has brightened because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoils of their enemies which they found. For now there would have been a much greater slaughter among the Philistines. Okay. By the time the people have driven back the Philistines, they are faint with hunger, so they immediately slaughter the Philistines' livestock and begin eating the meat with the blood in it, verses 31 and 32. Saul orders the livestock to be slaughtered in his presence, and the Israelites for no, well, I typed that wrong. And he slaughtered in his presence, so the Israelites will not sin by eating the blood. So, you know, we look at Saul as a bad guy. Saul understands that eating the blood is wrong, and he's going to stop it. He is not just an amoral guy who believes you can do whatever you want. He sees this as a sin, and he takes measures to make sure that it stops. So eating blood was a serious offense against the law of Moses, according to Leviticus 17:10. And whatever man of the house of Israel, or the strangers who dwell among you, who eats any blood, I will set my face against the person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood. And even though he's already said this in the previous verse, he reiterates here that even the strangers living among the Israelites could not eat blood. Nor shall any stranger who dwells among you eat blood. Whatever man of the children of Israel or of the stranger who dwells among you, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. For it is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains its life. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh. For the life of all flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. And then this is reiterated down in verses, previously, this is from chapter 17. He said the same thing back in chapter 7 as well, that they were not to eat the blood. Not only did God give this prohibition to the Israelites, but also all the way back in the days of Noah. Genesis 9:4, he told Noah, but you shall not eat flesh with its life. That is its blood. And the Gentile Christians in Acts, next slide, Acts 21:25. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. Blood and things strangled are squeezed in there between things offered to idol and sexual immorality. And it's this same prohibition is given in Acts 15:29. So can Christians eat blood? One of these things applicable, since we're on the subject of eating blood, can Christians eat blood? Is blood even eaten? Is this even a concern? Do people eat blood? Sometimes. It's not real popular in the United States. But the most common example would be, I guess that we're aware of, would be black pudding, right? A sausage made out of the blood of the animal. So, and there are other cultures that eat quite a bit of it. So it's not something we're necessarily served a platter of. You don't necessarily see blood pudding on the buffet, you know. But it does exist as something people can't eat. Is that something we're allowed to do? Go ahead, David. Okay, so yeah, we can touch on that as well. Some people, and I think Jehovah's Witnesses are famous for that, will not get a transfusion because of this verse as well. So those two things: can Christians eat blood? And since David's brought it up, can Christians get a blood transfusion? Two separate questions. You can answer either one. Order doesn't matter. It could be one of those things that if it offends you, maybe others will be offended by it. I do notice that it's interesting to me that God is so negative about eating blood there against the Israelites. And not only that, it's one of the few commandments we saw he made to Noah. So this is something that God apparently has a real issue with. And I don't know if that's changed today. The things they say in Acts lead me at least to feel like probably not. So, since no one else wants to jump in, I come down on the side that, I personally, I will not eat blood. And it's not because I think it's disgusting. though it doesn't really sound all that appetizing. It's specifically because of these passages in Acts. But does anyone want to take a different opinion?
In Acts 15, James
Yeah. Acts 15:29 is also, James tells you to abstain from blood. It comes up, there. And this was actually, they literally get together to decide if they're going to bind the law of Moses on the Gentiles, specifically the dietary restrictions. And they decide, no, the Gentiles don't have to follow the dietary restrictions. But in the same breath, they say, but don't eat blood. So it's not like we can say that the lifting of the dietary restrictions takes away this restriction, because it's specifically singled out as an exception when they're making their decision about whether or not Christians have to follow the dietary restrictions. It's like, yes, don't follow the dietary restrictions, but, go ahead, Eddie. I called you David again, Eddie.
All of those things predate the law of Moses.
Yes.
They are universal laws
Yeah,
of God.
yeah. So and I think, and again, if you can hear, Eddie says all these prelate the law of Moses. And we saw that, I looked with the blood, I saw it specifically, or showed that specifically, that he made that commandment to Noah, but these other things as well. Even before the law of Moses, God had made it clear that he was opposed to sexual immorality and that he was opposed to idolatry. So I think that's why we see this opposition, this God's opinion against eating blood coming for even today. And blood is not the red stuff in the meat. Right? The red stuff in the meat is myoglobin. And so, some people might say, you need to cook the meat to cook the blood out. Well, it's myoglobin, and it doesn't cook out. It just turns red. Instead of red, it turns brown. So we're not talking about myoglobin. We're talking about things like blood pudding, where you're literally eating the blood that has been drained out of the animal. So somebody brought up transfusions. Oh, go ahead.
Another thing I read is things offered to idols, and Paul gives them permission. First Corinthians, to eat things that are meat that has been sacrificed to idols.
Kind of, yeah, that's kind of a can of worms there, because when Paul talks about things offered to idol, his reasoning there is what? It's not real, right? It's not a real God. He tells them not, I think if I remember correctly, he tells them not to if they know, like if someone tells them, then don't do it. But you don't have to go out of your way to determine the source of the meat, because if you don't know and it's a false God, it's really not idolatry. So anyone make any comments or thoughts on that idea? Yeah, there is, it is, we're looking at the question of can you eat meat sacrificed to idols, it does get a little bit thorny because of that verse. But we're almost out of time. So anybody have any thoughts on the transfusion question that David brought up? Nobody disagreed with me when I said we shouldn't eat blood. So does that also mean we shouldn't get blood transfusions? You're shaking your head no. I mean, I think that involves an inference, right? I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, he says not to eat it, so we should apply that to transfusions as well. I don't think of a transfusion as eating. I can see where they're coming from. It's a similar idea, but there's an inference that they're making there, that because these ideas are similar, that they should apply it to both. But I don't think it's a necessary inference, and I don't see a text that's specific about that. Okay, so where do we get to? We're going to look at Saul's vow some more. We'll continue to look at Saul's vow, and then we'll do chapter 14. We'll probably go through chapter 14 pretty quickly, even though it's super long. And then so we'll get into chapter 15. So please go ahead. If you didn't read chapter 14 for today, read it for next time, and then read chapter 15 as well. Thank you.